Riftwalkers Radio is waiting for you.
Just step through the rift.
And discover a world of fantasy like you've never heard before. All right, let's dive into this horror writing thing. You know, you sent us this video, right, by JBat on YouTube. It's called Writing Horror and How to Make It Mean Something. Really got me thinking, you know.
Yeah, it's more than just like cheap thrills, right? It's about, well, JBat talks about this horror that really sticks with you, kind of gets under your skin.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. We'll talk characters, the suspense, the reveals, the whole shebang.
The kind of horror that makes you like think, you know, question things and maybe look over your shoulder a little more.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So JBat, he starts off, he's talking about characters.
Right.
And how, you know, we actually have to care about them. Not just some random people there to get killed off, right?
Yeah, totally. Like, who wants to see some boring cardboard cutout, you know, just running from a chainsaw? You need someone to root for, someone you're invested in.
Right. And he gives this example, Jim Smith, just your average guy running from an axe murderer.
Yeah, no backstory or anything, just there he is, honestly. Jim Smith bites it. I don't think I'd care.
Right. But then he introduces another character, Jim. And this Jim, he's sacrificing himself, you know. So his sister, his friends can get away. Same axe murderer, though.
And it's subtle, right? But suddenly we're like, oh, Jim, we get it. He's selfless. We're rooting for him, hoping he makes it.
Right. That's a well-developed character. It changes everything.
It really does. So how do we make these awesome horror protagonists then? JBat, he has some ideas, some key things to focus on.
Likability, that's a big one, right? You got to want them to survive.
But it's not just about being like a perfect person, you know? Even if they have flaws, they got to have something we like about them, real motivations, you know what I mean?
Like Captain Crozier in The Terror. He's got this strength, this sense of duty, even with all the craziness.
Perfect example. He makes mistakes, yeah. But we admire him, right? We want him to make it, even when it seems impossible.
And it's more than just liking him, right? There's this balance between, like, being vulnerable, but also being able to act.
Right. If they're invincible, there's no tension, no danger. But if they're completely helpless, then it's just, well, a bloodbath.
JBat calls it believability. We got to believe they could actually make it.
Even if it's a long shot, yeah. And that's where the unique trait comes in. That's something special. The edge they have could be anything. Intelligence or just pure stubbornness, even like a superpower.
Okay, so we've got these awesome characters, right? But how do we structure the plot to keep people hooked? This is where JBat's detective story analogy gets interesting.
Yeah, at first I was like, huh. But it makes sense. You know, both genres, they use suspense, mystery, revealing things slowly.
But there's a difference, right?
Yeah.
JBat points this out. Detectives, they usually have the power to solve the case, to confront the bad guy. But in horror, there's this imbalance.
Yeah, the protagonist is usually outmatched, trying to figure out what they're even up against, vulnerable.
Like an alien, Ripley, she's smart, she's resourceful, but she's going up against this thing, this xenomorph.
Exactly. And it's so intense because we're wondering, how is she going to survive? The mystery unfolds slowly. It keeps you hooked the whole time.
So the pacing matters. You can't reveal too much too soon.
It's like peeling back layers, slowly uncovering the real horror.
You got to tease the audience, keep them guessing, don't show the monster right away.
And this is where it gets really interesting. In horror, the mystery doesn't always have to be solved. And the monster, well, it doesn't always get defeated.
Wait, so are you saying, like, the bad guy can win?
Sometimes, yeah. And that's what makes horror so unsettling. You don't always get the nice, happy ending.
That is kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
But also more like real life sometimes.
Exactly. And JBat says if the monster does win, the character, they have to have gone through something developed. So the ending, even if it's sad, still feels like worthwhile.
Otherwise, it's just, well, like a bummer, right? Pointless suffering.
It has to feel earned, even if it's not the ending we want.
Okay, so we've got these characters, we've got the mystery, and maybe a not-so-happy ending. How do we amp up the horror even more? JBat talks about this technique, the false sense of security.
Yeah, classic. It plays with your expectations, right? Makes you feel safe, then bam, the rug is pulled out.
It's like luring you in, setting a trap, and then unleashing the horror.
JBat uses this story, Barasa? Have you read it?
Oh yeah, Barasa. I remember, it starts so normal. Family, new town, settling in, nothing too strange at first.
Right, and then there are these little hints. A weird smell or like a shadow, something just off.
And that's what gets you, makes you doubt yourself. Is something wrong or is it just me? You're tricked into feeling safe.
You think, oh, this is just a haunted house story, but it's not.
And then the real horror comes out, and it's so much worse because it was hidden, simmering under the
A
surface.
monster, it's not what you thought. The motives are messed up.
The misdirection, that's brilliant. You think it's supernatural?
Maybe a ghost or a demon, but it's something human, something worse.
It's terrifying. Because it's real. It could happen, right?
Barasa, that one really got to me, that twist.
Totally blindsided me. Have you read a story like that? One that just subverted your expectations completely?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Those twists, that's what makes horror good. The stories you can't forget, the ones that make you question everything.
And J-Bat mentions this, the benefit of a long, false sense of security. It gives you time to really get to know the characters, the world.
Yeah, it's like building something carefully, knowing it's all going to fall apart, and that anticipation, that dread, it's part of the thrill.
It's like walking alone at night
Mm-hmm.
and you hear something. You know it's probably nothing, but that feeling, that unease.
That's good horror writing, right? Tapping into our primal fears.
So we've got the characters, the mystery, the false sense of security.
We're building up to something. The next step is the big reveal. The monster, the moment of truth. It's like the climax, right? All that suspense, it has to pay off.
And J-Bat, he says something really interesting about this. It's not just like showing some scary creature or some big spectacle. It's about the real nature of the horror, the core of it.
It's like what the why, not just the what. Like in those detective stories, you have that aha moment, but here it's not just the culprit. It's something deeper, something that really messes with you.
It makes me think of Hereditary, that movie.
Mm-hmm.
The way the horror, it's revealed slowly and then bam, this revelation, it changes how you see the whole story.
Oh, yeah. Hereditary, that's a good one. Totally plays with your expectations. You think it's one thing, and then it's something way darker.
And it's not just for shock value, is it? It's about those bigger themes, those
Yeah.
primal fears, the stuff that really gets to you emotionally.
Yeah, J-Bat talks about this transcendentalist moment where the protagonist, and the audience too, they understand the real horror. It's like this huge realization, and it can be terrifying.
So it's not just the monster itself, but what it represents, the darkness.
Right, and this is where that idea of using the deadly sins, the virtues, it's really cool. J-Bat says the best monsters, they embody our own dark side.
So you're not just making a scary creature, you're making something that represents, I don't know, like our fears, anxieties, the bad stuff.
Exactly. Like the Babadook, it's not just a creepy figure in a book. It's grief, it's trauma, it's that darkness we all have inside.
Oh man, the Babadook, that movie really got to me. It was like the monster, it was a part of me, somehow my own fears.
That's what great horror does. It makes you face that stuff, the uncomfortable truth.
So the deadly sins, you could have a monster for greed, for envy,
Mm.
or one that like twists love into something bad, possessive.
Exactly. And then horror becomes more than just, well, entertainment. It's social commentary. It's looking inward, understanding what it means to be human.
I'm starting to see it, how horror can be so much more than just, the scary stuff. It's a way to deal with our fears, to try and understand the darkness in us, in the world.
And that brings us to that line from J-Bat. It's powerful. The only thing scarier than a horror story itself is having a good idea for one and not sitting down to write it. He's
Okay.
pushing us, right?
It's like he's saying, don't be afraid. Write those stories. Unleash those monsters.
Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones we never tell, the ones we keep hidden.
I'm feeling inspired, but also kind of scared, to be honest. Like, how do we take those big ideas, those feelings, and turn them into a story?
Well, that's where the craft of writing comes in, and J-Bat, he gives some tips.
Okay, lay it on me. What does he say?
Atmosphere, that's a big one, he says. Think about how the environment can be a character in itself.
Oh, like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining? That place is creepy all on its own.
Exactly. The setting, it can make things scarier, it can foreshadow, it's powerful.
So instead of just saying, like, it was a dark night,
Yeah.
you describe the wind, the shadows, that feeling in the air, right?
Yeah. And don't forget the other senses. What does it smell like?
Ah.
Taste like? What does the horror feel like? Engaging all the senses, it pulls you in.
Makes me think of that scene in Alien, when they're in that derelict spaceship. You can almost feel the humidity, the decay, that sticky stuff everywhere.
That's it. Ridley Scott, he used the environment to make you feel trapped, isolated.
So atmosphere, check. But what about the writing itself? How do we make it sound, well, scary? How do we use words to evoke horror?
J-Bat says vivid imagery, sensory details, that show don't tell thing.
So instead of saying the monster was scary,
Mm.
you describe its teeth, its eyes, its breath.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to use metaphors, similes, all that good stuff. Think about Stephen King, how he describes Pennywise in IT. He doesn't just say clown, he makes you feel it, the evil.
Yeah, he's the best at that. Those images that stick with you, like the blood in the sink and The Shining, or the leeches in Dreamcatcher. Ugh, so creepy.
It's about finding those details that make it real. Like you could touch it, you can't escape it.
But it's not always about the gross stuff, right? It's about that feeling of dread that something's coming.
J-Beck calls it the power of suggestion, leaving things unsaid, letting our imaginations run wild.
Like Lovecraft, he describes his monsters as, like, indescribable, beyond our understanding.
Exactly. We're afraid of the unknown, right? The things we can't see or explain.
That feeling of being watched, of knowing something's there even if you can't see it.
And then there's pacing. J-Bat says a well-paced story, it can make anything scary.
So it's not about just throwing all the scary stuff at once. It's about the rhythm, the buildup.
Like in Get Out, it starts slow, almost like a rom-com, but there's this tension built.
Yeah, that slow burn, you're just waiting for it to explode. And when it does, it hits hard.
Jordan Peele, he's great at that, building that paranoia. You don't know who to trust.
Okay, so we've got atmosphere, vivid imagery, suggestion, pacing, anything else.
J-Bat ends with this, and it's important. He says, don't forget about the human element.
What's that mean?
He's saying even the scariest monsters, they reflect us, our own darkness, our flaws.
So even if it's vampires and werewolves, it has to be grounded in human emotion, something we relate to.
Exactly. The best horror, it makes you think, makes you feel, makes you question yourself.
So even if our hero is fighting Dracula, we have to understand them, their fears, their hopes.
We have to see ourselves in them, even if it's a crazy situation.
Because really, the scariest monster is often the one inside us, right?
Yeah, it's like horror lets us kind of peek into those dark parts of ourselves, you know? The stuff we don't want to think about, those hidden fears and all that.
Right, exactly. And J-Bat, he makes this comparison to therapy. It's kind of interesting. Writing horror, it can be like a way to deal with those tough emotions, to
Yeah.
process them.
That actually, yeah, that makes sense. The horror stuff that's really stuck with me, the movies, the books. It's the ones that, I don't know, they felt real about being human, you know?
Yeah, it's not just about the gore or the cheap scares. It's about using horror to look at those dark parts of people, the stuff
Yeah.
that scares us. He really emphasized that, didn't he? It's not the surface stuff, it's what's underneath. The psychology, the emotions, that feeling that stays with you even after it's over.
And that's the mark of good horror, right? It's not just about being scared. It's about making you think, making you feel, making you question things.
So we've talked about a lot, right? Creating characters, the suspense, the reveal, using those vivid descriptions, pacing it right, and oh, that human element. Can't forget that.
It's about taking all those tools and crafting an experience that really hits home, one that gets under your skin when you can't shake off.
It's like a recipe for a truly terrifying story.
Mm.
But I gotta ask, what are some of your favorite examples? The stuff that does all this right.
Well, let the right one in. That movie, it comes to mind right away. It's a vampire movie, yeah, but it's so much more. It's about loneliness, isolation, love, even.
Oh yeah, I've heard good things about that one. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
What is it about that movie that makes it so, so good, in your opinion?
It's, I don't know, it takes those vampire tropes and kind of flips them around. The vampires, they're scary, but you also feel for them and the characters, their relationship is, well, it's messed up, but also kind of sweet. It's weird.
It's like the line between good and evil, monster and human, it's blurred.
Yeah, exactly. And the atmosphere, it's so bleak, snowy, it fits the characters perfectly.
The setting reflecting the inner lives, that's cool. For me, I love The Haunting of Hill House, that book. So classic.
Oh, Shirley Jackson. She was amazing. She understood that the scariest monsters, well, they're often the ones inside us, in our own minds.
In Hill House, the house, it's like a character, right? Full of the character's fears, their secrets, and the way she writes. So subtle, so creepy.
It gets to you. That book, it makes you question everything. Like, what's even real?
And that's what horror does so well, doesn't it? It makes us face those truths, the dark stuff.
It challenges us, pushes us to our limits, and yeah, leaves us feeling, well, a little messed up.
So for all you horror writers out there, listen to J-Bat. Embrace the darkness, the fear. Find those monsters inside and write those stories, the ones that scare you.
The world needs more good horror, that's for sure.
And that wraps up our deep dive into horror writing. Hopefully it's been, well, insightful. And maybe a little scary too. Remember, the scariest monsters are often the ones we make. So go write something terrifying. And until next time, stay spooky.